Coming next on Landscapes Through Time, artist David Dunlop explores Whistler's revolutionary views of Venice.
Hi, I'm David Dunlop. I'm a landscape painter here in Venice. Ironically, this city, this serene floating republic with its liquid streets, would be the birthplace of landscape painting. All the elements were here, coming straight from Venetian theater. The framing side curtains, the illusory spaces, the painted backdrops. Venice had been calling to artists for centuries. The Bellinis, Titian, El Greco, Canaletto, Monet, Turner, and Whistler. In 1879, James Abbott McNeill Whistler arrives here with a lot of ambition, especially for an artist who was bankrupt. Back in London, he just survived a very expensive trial, a suit against John Ruskin. He'd left angry creditors and angry critics. Whistler arrives here with very little money, an advance on a commission from the Fine Arts Society in London. He has 50 copper plates, a raft of brown pastel paper, and arrogance, wit, and charm. How was Whistler going to make a difference as an artist in Venice? He had some new tools. Photography is new to the time. The famous photographer Carlo Naya had already shown how to crop and compose differently here in Venice. But Venice beckoned with promise, the possibility of doing something new. And Whistler, he was going to present Venice as we've never seen it before, from odd angles, up close and intimate. We'll try to explore how Whistler could come here, redirect his career and a new vision for art with his paints, his etchings, and his pastels, here in the city that was muse to his imagination. He first finds a little apartment above a shop in the Frari section. Then he moves to a new studio space in the Ca' Rosonico, which today is an 18th century museum. After that, he's going to move to the Casa Jankovic across town near San Biagio. He's doing something very different. He, like Sargent, who arrives in 1880, are looking for little intimate vignettes. They're looking for some little slice of life, quiet places, the back streets of Venice. He's doing pastels and etchings, and this is the neighborhood he does them in. He'll do both horizontals and verticals. People are familiar with pastel artists. In fact, they have one of the very finest from the 18th century, the time of Canaletto and Guardi, Rosalba Carriera of Venice. Her idea of pastel was to create something that was more lifelike, a copy of nature, not the shorthand of glittering lights and colors that Whistler's going to have. These pastels, done in the gondola on the side of the canal, might prove to be studies for later oil paintings, but he has other ambitions for pastel as well. Some of them he works up more heavily, with more intense color, with a darker ground, with a broader subject, the entire city of Venice. We're going to try that next, with the entire vista of Venice before us.
Whistler was an iconoclastic experimental artist involved in the artistic revolution of the late 1800s that moved art from representational, narrative styles into modern paintings of feeling, arrangements of line, color, and form, into modernism. Ever the restless and peripatetic expatriate, Whistler found inspiration in change. Change of artistic method, change of friends from Rossetti to Oscar Wilde, change of mistresses from Joanna Heffernan to Maud Franklin, his companion in London and here in Venice, to his wife Beatrice Godwin, and a change of locations from his birth in Lowell, Massachusetts in 1834, to his childhood in Russia, to a career swinging between Paris, London, and Venice. Whistler spent time in St. Petersburg, where his father served as a consultant for Russia's railway system. Whistler was just 15 when his father died, and his family left Russia for the United States. He entered West Point Academy when he was 17, where he excelled in French and drawing. He was expelled 3 years later by Robert E. Lee. One of Whistler's first jobs was drawing maps for the U.S. government, where he discovers etching. In 1855, he leaves for Paris to become an artist. The art world in Paris was still dominated by the traditional Paris salon, but new artists experimented with more spontaneous effects than the polished academic style. In 1856, he finds his way to the studio of Charles Glare, the future incubator of the Impressionists. Whistler moved easily in the avant-garde circles in Paris and London, involved in the symbolist and aesthetic movements. Like the early Impressionists, Whistler was attracted to Japanese prints for their designs, simplicity, and calligraphic style. Whistler, always uneasy with instruction and authority, let his influences come as he found them, whether as a sick child with magical illustrations by Hogarth, as a student copying an adored landscape by Turner, or peripatetic traveler finding Dutch masters in Holland like Hals and Rembrandt, and Velasquez, Delacroix, Corot, Manet, and Courbet in France. By the mid to late 1800s, Corot, Delacroix, Lautrec, and Degas had repopularized printmaking with a new spontaneity, a painterly expression. Whistler publishes the French set of etchings in '58 and the Thames set in '71. They help establish his reputation as an artist. His later Venetian etchings are more evocative and suggestive. In 1859, Whistler moved to London and found a city deep in an industrial and artistic revolution. Whistler rejected moral messages, mythical stories, and historical illustration, art for art's sake. After Turner's example, he could now reject tight realism. He saw romance in the city's sooty fogs and created his own unique style of atmospheric landscapes, from thin veils of paint, as evocative as breath on a window pane, he said. Here was an art of suggestion that evoked sensations through distilled arrangements of line, design, and subtle color harmonies. He also introduced a new way of thinking about art through his titles, nocturnes, symphonies, musical arrangements. Whistler alternated between etchings, landscapes, and portraits, always a reliable revenue stream. He also found new patrons through his portraits, such as Freddie Leyland, the owner of Whistler's controversial Peacock Room. Whistler had several major splashes in the art world. His portrait of his mistress and model Jo Heffernan, the Lady in White, was exhibited and ridiculed at the radical 1863 Salon des Refusés. Then the celebrated portraits of his mother and the Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle. Both went to major museums and enhanced his reputation. In 1877, Whistler exhibited new provocative paintings in London. The eminent critic John Ruskin reviewed them harshly, claiming that Whistler had thrown a bucket of paint in the public's face. Whistler sued Ruskin for libel and won, but was only awarded a farthing. The libel trial bankrupted him. The Fine Arts Society in London, a society devoted to printmaking, came to his rescue with a commission for 12 etchings to be done in Venice over 3 months. They would exhibit and sell them back in London. But Whistler always had his own agenda and stayed for over a year. He returned to London with over 50 copper plates, a handful of oil paintings, and 100 pastels, hoping they would restore his reputation and his finances. The pastels he makes in Venice were also exhibited and sold by the Fine Arts Society. Whistler enjoys playing with pigment, whether it's dissolved in linseed oil for oil paint, or, as in these pastels, the French word for colored chalk, simply dried powdered pigment mixed with gum resin. He had previously used pastels for sketches, but here in Venice, he approached pastels with a new poetic vision, a new direction, and they caused a sensation.
Many artists from the 17th, 18th, 19th century sketch and paint right here. We're on the Giudecca. For centuries, this has been the superhighway of Venice, and it still is. All the commercial traffic and tourist traffic is here. Across, of course, the Doge's Palace, the Campanile, the Dogana, Santa Maria della Salute. We've got a panorama of all of Venice. 100 years before John Singer Sargent and James McNeill Whistler come here is Guardi. And Guardi paints a scene across the lagoon and gets this little thin strip, sparkles of light. Here is Whistler a century later. This is in oil, this is a pastel. He's been seeing this idea. Turner tries the same compositional idea. And Whistler, who's always trying to distinguish himself with a new direction by pushing off, by reacting to what happened in the past, is going to violate a couple of the principles of design. He's taking this line, putting it in the middle, thinking that if I drive enough color, I can drive enough attention and you won't notice that I've divided the picture in about half. He's a little under half. And he's using a very dark ground with a dark brown paper. So we've got complementary color, little notes of vermilion, some black, And over here are the telltale signs of Whistler's butterfly. The butterfly is his signature symbol, and his butterflies are distinguished by a little tail, the stinger. And of course, for Whistler, his great pleasure in life was making art and making enemies. Writes a book to that effect, The Art of Making Enemies. He was excellent at it. This is a much more studied pastel than this pastel. Here it's very quick. He's on a paper like this. He's brought some paper with him from London, and some paper he's acquired here. As we set up, I'm normally sketching continually to try to create a design that I think will be coherent and effective, using the height and width that I'm going to use in the final pastel that I'll do later. I decide which sort of horizon I would like, and I'm going to pick a lower horizon and then just make little notes. I would have a little silhouette. People have done this for a long time. If Turner were here, he'd be doing little silhouette, no bigger than this. Whistler's doing the same thing. Now, I know that the water is moving back in space, so I make a note to myself using linear perspective notes. I'm fortunate today to have these cumulus clouds back here. You can see I'm building a triangle from this side and this side of those clouds, and then the sky comes down like the sea goes in. And then smudge, quick sketches. I'll do it multiple times. Now I'll pull out the pastel paper itself, and I'm going below that middle, not trying to transcribe specific information, just the notes of light as they catch the sun and sparkle back to us. It's a form of calligraphy both Guardi and Whistler would have in common. So I have my horizon and I have some location, knowing that the clouds, which are ever changing, always in motion, always dynamic, I'm going to just capriciously pick a point. I'm placing a soft blue, and there's several ways to do this. I can put the color down there, rub it on my finger, and rub it in to get something very nuanced, very, very soft. Or I can just go directly and then softly move the color about. His shapes blurred like the ambiguous atmospheres of Turner. Whistler does have a selection of pastels, some very hard and sharp, and some very soft and crumbly. I've shifted the direction of the stroke. You see that these touches that Whistler or other pastelists would use are multi-directional, and they're going down in broken patterns like an impressionist would apply the paint, broken strokes. I can do the blending like an oil painter, and he was an oil painter who liked to blend using his sauces. And when I'm down here, my strokes are more lateral. I'm still letting that brown substrate, the color of the paper, show through. That's a soft pastel, and I'll let it stay browner down in here. I'm going to blend a little. There's lots of blending tools. A rag, your fingers are excellent at this. Now he leaves much of this open, so I too am going to leave sections of it open, just blending some. And the principle behind all of this is allusion to, not illusion, allusion to a subject. What do I have that would work with a gray violet? I'll try this, testing. And I mix it with this color, but not particularly dark enough. So if I take this color with that color and the brown, I'm getting something I like a little better. For the haze, it's more of a red violet than a blue violet. So I'll put the undercolor, the darker color, down first. Whistler's friends include not just the poets and the writers, but the musicians. Among those musicians is Debussy. Whistler is thinking about the titling and how titles lead our thoughts. Whistler decides, I'm going to name my pieces after music and disconnect them from the traditions of art history, saying, this is the place, there's the campanile, there's the Santa Maria della Salute, so that you can feel the painting rather than read the painting. And Debussy's going to do the same thing. He's going to call the musical pieces la mer, or les nuages, after landscapes, so that that can liberate the mind, the imagination, and the spirit to find other possibilities. I'm going to build up this territory and then add something a little deeper. But before I even do that, I see how it looks. I don't make my decisions in advance. I make my decisions later. As I am working, I make discoveries in the paint. I make discoveries in the pastel. I make discoveries in the ink to be in this particular moment. And that's what's so essential about Whistler. And it's how your eye amalgamates the color. When you look at the image from a distance, everyone of significance in art history seems to have understood this. Rembrandt, Titian, Turner, the older he gets, Whistler, the older he gets, the better they understand that experience of how the eye assembles an image in spite of what it's not able to read. Legibility and neatness don't count. I'm questing down here for just the right shade. And of course, that's something as an oil painter I'm used to making. So here we go. There is the melody of Venice, the church bells, the sound of the engines, the passers-by talking in their various languages. It's the melody, the fabric, the quilt that is Venice. That's what Whistler experienced, that's what Turner experiences. And how do you weave those threads, all that cacophony together into coherence in two dimensions? So much music, so much rhythm. And of course, rhythm in music is what this edge is all about. Everything from Primavera to the Last Supper. Look at the arrangement of the figures. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Or Primavera. 1, 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3. And the buildings are the same way. Sargent, Whistler, they were all musicians. It's what you did in the 19th century. It's part of your education. Our focus tends to move toward a center. We never read more than 70% of a page. And what Whistler, as Turner and others have observed, is if he consolidates most of the color and light and activity in this oculus area here, that keeps us from psychologically leaking out of the image, moving in because it corresponds with the way we visually experience the world. And so the corners are losing any sense of description. If a piece is too big, he just simply snaps it off. Then test the color. Pretty intense, but intensity of color is one of the things he finds delightful in his pastels. Here, he sometimes plays with highly contrasted colors called complementary colors, and we get simultaneous contrast. Push some of this deeper blue in an effort to give volume to this cloud, because the higher the contrast around the cloud, this warm ground is being exploited by these soft blues. But if I take a blue like this and an orange like this, and I put them side by side, that intense orange, from opposite sides of the color wheel, the intensity is amplified when they're abutting because they each modify or amplify the opposite color. That's the effect of simultaneous contrast. In 1879, that's the new idea. That's the idea that's pushing Impressionism, that has pushed Renoir and Monet. What happens is your eyes are very light sensitive and they're transducing electrochemical signals to the brain. It's a chaos of light to create color and imagery in here. And it's being sorted out in the visual cortex. Even if I just put orange down, and this is what Michel Chevreul discovers in his studies. He's a scientist in France, and he writes this marvelous book on the principles of color and harmony in the 1830s. When you stare at that, after a while, looking away at a white sheet, you see its color complement, its opposite, because it's an after-image quality. My cones are getting a little fatigued from looking at the orange. They are seeing more of the opposite color. I'm going to start putting some of that deeper blue down into here. Whistler's goal in making these pastels was many-fold. Of course, he wants to try to plow new ground with the material. Certainly he was aware of what Degas was doing with this, and Mary Cassatt was doing with this. He knew them. But he wanted to try to do something else and break it up more in a manner of the Impressionist paintings. I'm going to test a deeper blue. And more lateral movements, just so that I can follow that tradition, the dark threshold. Another thing he would do to accent the pastel, he could work in a black or another darker color, but he used graphite too.
Whistler's stark poverty in Venice did not obscure his magnetic charisma. He drew a following of attentive young artists, once attached to Frank Duveneck.
I'm just spotting some notes of color that are complementary to the light blues. I'm doing some blending as if it were glazing in oil. Some territories are discrete with their edges and other areas are blended. To give the effect of the haze, I'm going to leave the broken marks appear like the Impressionist paintings. He works all sides of the stick as much as he works the edges, so he's got 3 or 4 widths to play with. These sparkle notes that everyone from Guardi to Whistler to Bellini and Lorenzo Lotto all found fun and a way of drawing our attention to the highlight, to the sparkle. It's why jewelry sells so well. We're attracted to sparkle. Sparkle and exaggeration. We do it in our own lives, and as artists like Turner or Guardi or Whistler all discover, the more we exaggerate anything, exaggeration attracts our attention. It's the theater that is life. Nobody understood the value of theater better than James Abbott McNeill Whistler. He wore a black cape, a floppy hat. He had a curling iron for his hair, so he would have a perfect curl in front. As he stepped out, he always wore patent leather shoes, and he carried a needle-sharp cane, which he used to demonstrate and correct students and friends. He knew the value of a public persona. Whistler studies lots of old masters, but doesn't like to admit it. We're always part of a stream of interconnectedness, and we cannot help but become influenced by where we are and who we are looking at. They become our menu. Whistler was troubled by the fact that perhaps his evocation in paint, pastel, or dry point and etching appears easy when in fact it's highly sophisticated and distilled. Red. Test a hot red, the color with the most psychological impact, because it turns out in the visual cortex it's the area that lights up the most. It's the first color we really recognize as an infant, red. And it's the compilation of marks, whether you were Rembrandt or Monet or Whistler, in their patterns, and it was the harmony that would create the mood, just so that you get the transition of value, lighter to darker, less saturation to more saturation, blue-green to deeper blue, which helps build a sensation of depth and space. Until the 20th century, where we really are interested in just the experience of the paint on a flat surface. But it's in the 19th century with artists like Turner or Whistler that we begin to have the reference to the notion that it really is about the paint and it isn't about the subject. I'm just carrying some of this blue off farther left and right because he leaves the territory unfinished, so you have evidence that it is not an illusion, that it is just marks on a flat surface. Whistler will invent a new way of presenting art in galleries. The light wall with one painting next to another, with lots of space, because he understood how we see, how we pay attention, and that you could elevate the importance of anything by isolating it in space. The sun is coming along to encroach on this image and give me back glare. As the light rises on the end of the 19th century, coming in here from the west, it's as if the sun were rising in the west. The world has been turned upside down, and that's appropriate for Whistler. His goal was to turn the world upside down. His intention, his ambition, and his work give evidence to an imagination that was large, to arrogance that was large, and to an experimenter who enjoyed moving the paint around to effect a visceral, sensual experience on a two-dimensional surface. And it's through this understanding of how to reduce a painting to its most basic elements, through this distillation, this isolation of light and harmony, that you have an intimate experience, an experience of surface, of paint, but also of mystery. I'm David Dunlop. I'm a landscape painter.
Funding for Landscapes Through Time was made possible by the following. On the next Landscapes Through Time, artist David Dunlop travels to the rocky shores of Maine to explore Winslow Homer's dramatic seascapes.